and why we need to end overproduction. We will start in a couple of minutes, but in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. My name is Joe Simeon, and I'm Director Founder at Zero Waste Europe. We also have our panelists, Anna Harry from Lund University, Julia Ford from Loom, and Teresa Morsen, Zero Waste Policy Officer here at Zero Waste Europe. We will start in a moment, letting everybody in, and we'll get started. All right, so hello again. A warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know Zero Waste Europe, we are a Brussels-based NGO working on advocacy at EU level to achieve a zero waste society. We are also a network of groups in 34 European countries with organizations. Also, we work with organizations around the world implementing zero waste strategies at the national and a local level. The webinar today is about fashion. It's named Beyond Circular Fashion. And the reason why we have picked a webinar on fashion, considering Zero Waste Europe is been having webinars since quite some time, and we didn't touch on this point so far, is because Zero Waste Europe has been working on waste since more than 20 years. And together with our members, we started working on stopping end-of-life solutions such as landfill incineration. We looked at how to optimize separate collection systems. And the thing is that the more you know about waste, the more you realize the importance of avoiding this waste. Because honestly, once you get to like dump or burn waste, really like this is a system failure. And we could even see that recycling has lots of shortcomings. So of course, anything that can be avoided via reuse or via prevention, we should do so. So over the last year, Zero Waste Europe has been working a lot on bio-waste, on packaging, even nappies, coffee capsules, a number of issues, and also a lot on plastics. And we have decided finally to start looking into the issue of textiles. Because we see really a big gap there, a big opportunity, and we think that we can contribute to actually to improve the situation in the fast fashion world. Also, Europe is far from perfect. From a policy perspective, we can say that we have legislation that deals with waste, that deals with eco-design, etc. But really, there is a big gap when it comes to textile work. And because of the relationship that textile have with plastics, we thought that it's important to look into this. So with this webinar, we're opening this conversation. We are reaching out to the business sector, to the academia, to policymakers, to start discussing this issue and address some key questions. The key questions we want to address are why is fast fashion an issue? How does a sustainable fast fashion system look like, if that exists at all? How to do business as a sustainable brand? What challenges do the businesses that are trying to do the right thing face? And how can governments and legislation actually support this transition? In the webinar today, we'll have 4 speakers. We'll have Anna Harry, from the University of Lund, is a doctoral researcher there. We have Julia Ford, a CEO and co-founder of Loom, a business trying to do things differently in the world of fashion. And we have Teresa Morsen, who is the waste policy officer at Zero Waste Europe. And there's also myself, who will be presenting the study that we have published at Zero Waste Europe called precisely Beyond Circular Fashion. Each presenter will present for 10 minutes. And after every presentation, we'll have 5 minutes for clarification questions. And at the end of all presentations, we'll have final 30 minutes for a joint Q&A and a discussion with all the speakers. Before we start, a quick note on the tools for the webinar. First, feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function. You should also submit your questions for the speakers in the Q&A tool that you have also in the Zoom, which I will then pass on to the speakers to save time. You should know that we're also streaming this on YouTube. So those joining via YouTube, you can submit the questions in the chat there, and this will be relayed back to me, and I can pass them on to the speakers. And you should know that this webinar is recorded, and of course, we will make it available after this session. So without further delays, let's start. As I said, I'm going to be the first speaker. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So, beyond circular fashion, to set a bit the context and the framing, I would like to provide some data that those of you who are following the textiles and the fast fashion sector are probably familiar with, but I think it's always useful to remember a bit the context that the fashion textile sector is participating in the global greenhouse gas emissions from 4 to 10, depending how you count it. Also, there's between 60 and 400 million workers, depending how you count it, working on the textile sector at the global level. In Europe, we're talking about 2 million workers. We're using huge amount of water and materials. We know that the production of fast fashion has doubled from year 2000 until 2015, and the exports of used clothes from the European Union to the rest of the world have increased 3 times also in the last 20 years. And we also know that separate collection of textiles is not working very well, and recycling even less, because of course the fashion is not designed to be recycled in the first place. Also, it's useful to know that the average European is buying 60% more clothing comparing with 15 years, and is wearing it 36% less time. So therefore, it is clear that action is needed in this field. There's lots of information in this slide that we have produced this as an infographic to try to portray the difference between a linear system for textiles and a circular system. At the end of the day, what matters, and similar applies for other materials and also for other sectors, is to have the value of the material staying for as longer as possible in the system, and making sure that everything is designed to be reintroduced in the system. And something that this graph maybe doesn't show as much is the volumes that we're talking about. In the current linear system, the volumes are huge and are increasing. In a circular system, really, it's not a matter of only making it circular, it's a matter of making it zero waste and reducing consumption. Now, when we look at fast fashion, is it a success? Is it a failure? Is it both? It really depends. From a purely business perspective, it is clear that it has managed to produce something in a very cheap and fast way, and linked to very effective marketing strategies that stimulate consumption. So from that perspective, that's kind of like the story for the startups, kind of. On the negative side, or if you want more, like the main enablers that explain this, again, inefficiency, so-called efficiency, is of course the introduction of synthetic fibers. In the last 50 years, the introduction of fossil fuel-based fibers has reduced the prices a lot, because it's half the price of cotton, and that has allowed this industry to produce a lot more and a lot faster. There's also the externalization of environmental and social costs. This out of sight, out of mind has allowed countries in the global north to actually to produce without being aware of the environmental and social consequences, and the delocalization of production. Europe has seen a huge amount of externalization of delocalization of the production, and of course the supply chain is now global. So these 3 main enablers explain also the success of this story. And I think here there's a key thing that is that the circularity is key. We need more circularity, and as Zero Waste Europe, we've been involved in circularity conversations since the beginning of this, back in 2014, when the European Union submitted the first circular economy strategy. But circularity is not enough, and the reason for that is because even if we increase recycling, the problem is that production is increasing even more. And again, we know that textile is not very recyclable, but even if it would be, that would not be enough. And we are worried actually that as much as we need to design stuff for recycling, and as much as we need to recycle more, that kind of hides the big issue with textiles. And that is that, well, we are producing too much and we need to reduce. We did a study at Zero Waste Europe called Is Net Zero Enough for the Material Sector, in where we looked at the carbon budget for different materials, one of them being plastic. And one of the reasons why circularity is not enough is because if we look at how much carbon budget is available for the plastics sector from now until 2050 at the global level, the budget is of 16 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. And the current business as usual is setting us into like a scenario of 129 gigatons, which basically exceeds and puts us in a path of like 4 degrees warming. You know, of course, plastics are used for lots of things, and textiles represent less than 10% of the total plastic use, even though plastic is more than 60% of all the textiles out there. But what I mean here is that sooner or later, we need to reduce the use of plastic because we don't have enough carbon to stay in the 1.5 warming. And of course, circularity is not going to be enough to stay within this carbon budget. So therefore, we need to change this. Another issue is that legislation is key, but again, it's not enough. And Teresa later on is going to give a presentation about what are our demands related to policy. But again, when we look at policy, what we're doing is actually trying to address the way garments are being produced and are being sold. But it's a lot more difficult to address overconsumption with legislation. And therefore, legislation is going to be very important. We need more of it, but it's not going to be enough. And that's basically, according to our study, that's what leads us to this statement that there's no such a thing as a sustainable textile product unless we have sustainable textile business models. Because again, even if you make something to be recycled, doesn't mean it's going to be collected and recycled, and doesn't mean actually that maybe we didn't need this textile garment in the first place if the stuff would last longer, or we would use it differently, or we would repair it, etc. So understanding that products live in systems and creating the systems for these products to exist that include consumption, it's a key finding of the study that we published. And we asked ourselves, how would a sustainable, fair, zero waste business model look like? And we came up with 4 points that we believe that if met simultaneously, could lead to sustainable, fair, zero waste business model. Again, meeting one of them or 2 of them, that would really not do. These 4 are: 1, to design for physical and emotional durability. That means that the fashion industry should design garments that are both technically capable of enduring intensive use and many washing cycles, as well as being able to live through trends and not go out of fashion. And of course, be recyclable at the end of its life. Second one is that we will need to have more demand-driven production and design out unsolds and discounts, because according to the existing research, we see that between 10 and 60% of all that is produced is never sold or is sold at discounted prices. and between 20 and 30% of what is sold online is returned and rarely put back on sale. So I think that what we believe is there's room there for improvement and like reducing overproduction through demand-driven production. Third is that we need a full supply chain transparency and traceability post-sale that, of course, we lost when we externalized and we delocalized. We believe that a sustainable business model is capable of guaranteeing the quality and fairness of all its products and services, and this can only be achieved if the company knows where the components are sourced, how are they produced, as well as the fate of garments downstream and beyond. And then the supply chains blur responsibility and make transparency harder. So of course, like shorter supply chains, so in a way, relocalizing production would help with this. Fourth and last one would be extending the use phase after the first ownership. That means that the company has a system to take back, repair, re-dye, remodel, and or recycle its own clothes, or there's repair options out there in society so that these clothes, these garments can stay in circulation for a lot longer, even when one user is not using them anymore. So we believe that those were 4 principles that we found were useful, but we would be open to consider others. Our theory of change is that we want to engage with the progressive businesses in actually helping guide how like a virtuous business model looks like. That's the end of my presentation. I would like to say that I would like to ask whether the transition is going to be mandated by European regulations, still by economic and geopolitical trends such as protectionism, relocalization, or end of fossil fuels, or is it going to be forced by public pressure from angry citizens like it happened with single-use plastic? We don't know. I mean, of course, I think it's going to be a mix of everything. I think there's public pressure out there asking for the textile industry to change. There's going to be regulations, and there's going to be geopolitical issues that are going to impact the sector. So I think we are facing lots of changes, and in this transition, we would like to start this conversation with you. So that was it for my presentation. I'm going to check if there's any questions before we move to the next speaker. So I see there's a couple of questions. The first one from Yusra is, how can we convince policymakers and even the wider public to listen and center worker voices in the industry, particularly those in the global south, so that the most vulnerable people are not left behind? And yeah, how does a just transition look like for Zero Waste Europe? These are lots of questions together. I forgot to mention that there's lots of excellent work already done by other groups such as Changing Markets, the Wardrobe Change Campaign, etc., that are looking a lot into this. But for us to convince policymakers, one, we need to show how a virtuous zero waste textile system looks like. This is why we're developing this criteria. We need to show that it's possible. How does the right thing look like, so that we can model legislation to fit these best practices. And second, of course, we need to organize this just transition. We believe that today, of course, changing the system is going to take time, and we have time to adjust that, and that should be done in collaboration with them. We believe that even in the global south, from the people we've been talking to around there, they are, of course, very concerned about their working conditions, and the citizens in general are concerned about us using them as a dumping ground, and we believe that should stop. So, of course, it's a process that we will need to start and improve. Then Erika's is asking to expand on the term transparency after purchase, and how could it be implemented. So that's something that we don't have the time to look at much detail in the report. But transparency after purchase is more related to what happened to the product at the end of life. So what we see today is that there's lots of clothes that are being exported. And they are not exported as waste. They are exported under the label of reuse or recycle, when in fact, sometimes even 50 or 60% of what is in those bales ends up in the environment being open, dumped, or burnt. And we believe that there's a way to actually to improve this system, together with the organizations in the Global South, to trace what we are sending. And we need to change this. I think we should only be sending outside Europe what is fit for reuse and for recycling. And of course, that also is linked to the separate collection of textiles. So we need to set up in place a whole industry that is capable of doing that. I'm going to take one more question, because in the interest of time, we need to move to the next speaker. Sebastian is asking if you have examples of business models that fulfill all 4 criteria. In the study that you can download, you can find different companies that fulfill some of them. For the moment, we haven't found one that meets all the criteria, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And we would be happy if anybody of you finds one that fulfills all the criteria. That would be great. And we see lots of good initiatives in European companies in actually meeting several of those. And lastly, Ruth, we can maybe continue that outside the conversation, but on the role of renewable energy in the circular fashion system, of course, renewable energy is important, but the best use we can do of energy is to save it and in not having to produce stuff that we are not going to use in the first place. So apologies for rushing this. I'd just like, in the interest of time, going to move to the next speaker. The next speaker is Anna Harry. Wait a second. Where we have that? So yeah, Anna Harry is a doctoral researcher at Lund University, and sorry, because I had the videos here, but now it disappeared to many pages. Okay, here. So Anna Harry is driven by a desire to build a fairer global supply chains. She's finishing now her doctoral studies at Lund University. Her research focuses on understanding how we can build just and sustainable circular textile systems. And before academia, she spent years in the NGO world trying to advance sustainability in the textile and electronics industries. And her work has taken her to cobalt mines in in Congo, as well as several textile factories in India. Anna, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks also for your interesting presentation. I'm sorry to cut short your question and answer session. You had really good questions there also, but maybe we can continue with those later. I will just share my screen here and maybe put a timer on for myself, because I tend to overdo my time otherwise. So hi everyone, and thank you for having me here. Indeed, I'm a doctoral researcher in Finland in LUT University, working under the Phoenix project. It's an interdisciplinary project with multiple universities and companies, and we aim to create a just and sustainable textile industry in Finland and globally also. And my research mainly deals with the social aspects of the transition to circular processes, but we also look at environmental impacts of circular processes in our project. So I will talk today a bit about those also. Okay, first, if we go to the environmental impact part, first it needs to be said that there is a wide variety of different environmental impact categories that we could look at, and there's a wide variety of ways to do circular processes and business models and fibers and whatnot. So a sort of an all-encompassing answer to the question of what is the environmental impact of circular solutions in the textile industry is really difficult to give. And please remember that I show you only here a partial picture and maybe snapshots of research that has been done. That being said, much research and indeed also the one in the picture here that we did last year. Much research suggests that reuse or using secondhand and prolonging lifetime of clothing is often the best from a sort of a climate impact perspective, followed by recycling. Here you can see the sort of reduce scenario produces the least emissions. The reduce scenario is using the clothing that one already has and doubling the amount of time, the longevity of that clothing. Reuse means selling something secondhand and then it's used with another person, and recycle is recycling the materials, and share scenario here in this picture means rental. Now, explaining that a bit more in detail, why the recycle base is sort of using linearly and then throwing it away and using the old cloth as energy. Now, like for example, in our study, we noticed that recycling climate impact is very close to the base scenario. But this is not always the case. Now, the climate benefits of recycling vary a lot according to, for example, substituted fiber, recycling method, or electricity mix of a country where it's the recycling is being done. So, for example, we used cotton here, cotton jeans on the basis of this of our study, where we studied the LCA of cotton of different circular scenarios of cotton jeans. And so what we noted is that virgin cotton has a relatively low climate impact. So replacing that with recycled cotton doesn't have so much emissions savings, as recycling is also an energy intensive process. But then had we looked at another fiber, for example, polyamide or wool that have a higher climate impact when produced as virgin material, then replacing that virgin material with the recycled material maybe would have created more emissions savings, so to speak. Also, the recycling method that you use, is it chemical or mechanical? And mechanical tends to be a bit more climate friendly, has an impact on what is sort of the climate impact of recycling. Also, the electricity mix, for example, in which country do you use it? Is it used done with renewable energy or not? Has an impact on what the sort of climate impact of recycling is. But this is also now, this is also only talking about climate benefits. So if we think about circular economy and impacts to other environmental impact categories, for example, biodiversity or water, then once again, this picture might look a bit different. And I'll show you an example of that in my next slide. For example, if we think about cotton is a very water-intensive crop. So cultivating cotton requires a lot of water. So if we substitute virgin cotton with recycled cotton, then we will save a lot on water. And the same could be true for biodiversity, as it takes up a lot of space to cultivate cotton. The impacts of sharing models are a bit unclear still. There is not, I would say, enough research or empirical data on sharing models. But what we noted is that in some cases, the climate impact of sharing models, such as renting the jeans, can be even more than in the linear scenario. But then we sort of dug a little deeper into it, and we noticed that it makes a big difference if the rental model can increase the longevity of the product, or if it can increase the use time of the product, and if the logistics of carrying that product back and forth from the rental place can be done emission free. Now, if we can, with the rental model, improve all those three different parameters, then the rental model can actually be almost as good as reusing. So it really depends on how and what kind of products you are renting out, and how you can improve their longevity or not. But there is still more research, I think, needed on that front to know the actual sort of impact of rental in different product categories. So benefits of reuse also, I would say, depend a lot on, so secondhand clothing depend a lot on the substitution rate. So if people just keep buying sort of secondhand products in addition to buying virgin products, then the impact, the benefits are lessened. But if they buy them, so if people buy secondhand products instead of virgin products, then the impact can be better. But if they buy the secondhand products in addition to virgin products, then the impact is lesser. So if they just keep on buying more stuff, so the impact is less. Here is just another picture of research that we made in our project, showing also cotton linear towels. And the climate impact of recycling and reuse. And there we can also see that the recycling scenario is not much better than the linear life cycle. It can be even worse. But when we look at the water, then the water savings can be very big. And the best savings in climate we can come up with when we do reuse and recycling both. Now, just a few last points about social impacts of circular processes. So these novel circular processes and business models will create social impacts all around the world. They may also uphold old ones, or at best, they could heal old injustices in global supply chains, for example. But there is not yet enough information about what sort of the social impacts of different novel business models will be. Now, there's some research has been done about it, and some general notions I will present next. There are foreseen to be a geographical shift in production, for example, as the availability of raw material changes. For example, if we use old clothes as raw material, then those are more available maybe in Europe, which might shift all over. The production might shift a bit to Europe. And this has indeed been foreseen in some research that Europe will gain a bit, and the global south of many production countries such as India and Bangladesh will lose out on jobs. Also, decreased consumption can affect livelihood opportunities. And indeed, I was in India in January and interviewing manufacturing companies, and they were quite worried about this, as were many trade unions also, as they in principle supported the idea of circular economy and decreased consumption, but they were very worried about what happens to the jobs, because especially in places like India, in countries where they don't maybe have very well functioning institutions, people don't have sort of fallback positions. They might not have social security. They might not have other jobs to go to. So if they lose their job, it can have a big human cost. So farmers, factory workers, most often those without agency and in a marginalized role in the supply chains are the ones that are most vulnerable. Now, there might be also novel forms of worker exploitation in, for example, collection and sorting of recyclables. Also, the social impacts of novel circular fibers are still somewhat unknown. But then again, for example, chemical exposure might decrease a bit, as in India, what they did is they often used the same color as when they recycled a cloth. They used the same color as that old cloth or that cutting waste. So preventing the need from dyeing the clothing again. So that can lead to less chemical exposure for the workers, for example. Now, these are just examples. But in my opinion, also, like sort of the root causes of current social sustainability challenges in global supply chains are not necessarily addressed via circularity, such as power imbalances or ill-functioning institutions. So they are not maybe automatically improved. So just a final note, to promote justness and environmental sustainability, we need to, I'm all for the transition to circular economy, but I think it needs to be planned and implemented in a way that makes possible to sort of avoid a social and environmental rebound effect. So we must specifically design novel processes fit to context and take especially into account questions of social justice. We also need to look at root causes and in-functioning institutions. in global South countries, and we need to start sharing costs. What many of the, for example, the manufacturers in India were telling me that they would love to invest in solar energy, but they just do not have the money, and they were hoping that maybe brands who buy from them could chip in and share some of the costs. Yeah, that was my quick introduction to the topic. Sorry for going a bit over time.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was very interesting, and it really portrays really how complex the thing is when you start looking at the detail of the difference between reuse, repair, etc. It's clearly that, of course, prevention and reduction is what performs better. But of course, I mean, there's lots of details to take into account, and great for that presentation was great at addressing that. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A. I will start with the question from Ola that was asking if you take into consideration the land and water use of cotton when doing this analysis.
Yes, no, we only looked at climate impact in the first picture that I showed you. In the second one, the water impact was also included. And this is indeed the problem with many LCA studies, that it often looks only at one sort of impact category. And as there are many, so looking at the other categories, the result might be completely different.
Indeed, and I guess that is linked to also what Jörg is raising, that of course the rental model depends very much on what is it that we are renting. Is different to rent jeans and to rent a wedding dress, for example, right? Which you want to use potentially only once or twice.
Yes.
That.
Yes, that's I think it's exactly true. So products like wedding dresses or dresses for parties that you would buy and only use one time, and then they would sit idle in your closet, might make a lot more sense used, because then we could grow the usage times of that dress, and we could maybe decrease everyone's need to buy that dress individually. So that indeed I think would make more sense than renting out the things you might use in your everyday life. And then that will then create a lot of sort of back and forth logistics and a lot of uses also, washes also that might be unnecessary. Like I was interviewing a Finnish company, and they told me that they don't want to try the rental model. They think it doesn't fit their product, because their product doesn't need to be washed if it's owned by one single person, just needs to be aired. So they don't see it as feasible maybe to rent those out, because they think they would increase the amount of washes that needs to be done.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. And maybe one last question that Solène is raising about the rebound effect that you also mentioned. I mean, how could we avoid this rebound effect?
That's a very, very, very good question, which I don't have to answer. I think like this sort of fit to context, creating the business model fit for your product, and thinking really well in advance what kind of different rebound effects there could be, and then sort of planning your processes to combat those. That's the most important thing. Maybe doing ex ante investigation and impact analysis on what do you think the rebound effects might be. But I do not also have like a clear answer on that. For example, if we think about reuse, and one of the sort of rebound effects that I talked about is the fact that people then just buy reuse in addition to buying virgin products. One sort of solution there, for example, could be that we also make sure that our reused products are quality products. So we first of all produce everything as quality, so that we can buy as quality products secondhand as virgin, so we can buy all our sort of needs also secondhand. And then even I think, for example, Patagonia, I'm not sure if I remember the company correctly, they limited their secondhand sales. They also didn't want to sort of encourage crazy consumption even in secondhand. So they just said in some of their shops that you can only buy 2 pieces and that's it. We don't want you to go crazy. Just buy what you need, even in secondhand. So there are innovative ways, I think, to combat the rebound effect. But I think once again, all-encompassing solutions for that, I do not have.
Thank you, Anna. No, that makes sense. A friend of mine told me that his policy is to say one in, one out. So if he buys something secondhand, then he'll make sure that something in the wardrobe goes out to make sure there's always a balance so that you don't fill in the wardrobe with good stuff. But I mean, of course, that we're not going to use because we only have one body to wear stuff. So thank you very much for your intervention. If there are more questions for Anna, please continue to post them in the Q&A, and we will address them at the end of this presentation, of your presentation. We move to the next speaker, with Julia Paul. I don't know if I pronounced it right. Julia is the co-founder of the ethical clothing brand Loom. And Loom's mission is to make the textile industry less polluting. And they are convinced that to this end, the industry needs to produce less clothing. She's also an active member on the Mode Climate movement, which is a virtuous lobby for the textile industry in France, with over 500 members from brands, factories, and economic players in the field of fashion. So, Julia, welcome, and the floor is yours. 10 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I'm gonna first maybe tell you the story of how we create this kind of lobby in France, asking for globally regulation against overproduction and more specifically against fast fashion model. And then I'll give you some specific points that can be interesting in regards to the report they were just released. So we started, I'm the co-founder of an ethical brand, which is called Loom, and we're just making clothes that are good quality and that are made locally, and we use organic cotton. Well, we are a classical ethical brand, and we realized that we had an economical success. Our brand is working well, but at the same time, there's a lot of ethical brands that are doing well. You can Patagonia, Veja, or so on. But at the same time, if you look at the big picture, you'll realize that having ethical brand growing has never decreased the environmental, has never affected the environmental impact of our industry. Meaning, every year we are producing globally, textile industry produce more clothes. Every year, textile industry produce more pollution. So realizing that having ethical brand is not enough to having our industry shift, we gathered with other company, mostly ethical brand, but not only, also factories, but a lot of textile company from France. We gathered into a movement which is called Mode Climate, and we decided that to use our power, our economical power or influence, that government listen to you more if you provide jobs and money to the country. We decided to use this influence as a lobby, meaning to influence regulation, to change the law. But we don't want law that benefit our business model. We want laws that benefit the common good, because we realize that if nothing is done, a fast fashion model is going to eat everything, and if nothing is done, everywhere we're going to produce more and more clothes. And I think you all know all the consequences of producing more and more. Producing is polluting, so every time if you produce more, you pollute more. Maybe something I've learned. So what we do, basically, we try to understand all the regulatory windows where we can get into and introduce fast fashion regulation against fast fashion. So there are something we have learned by doing that. First thing we learned is physical durability is a trap. I know that we all think that before the clothes were of better quality, and now the quality have decreased, and we all think that fast fashion brands are doing low quality clothes. If by quality we mean physical resistance, like if the color is going to fade away if you wash, if the t-shirt is going to shrink if you wash it, and so on. Fast fashion is not less resistant than other brand, than other clothes, and it can be even the contrary. Explanation, it's because fast fashion use a great amount of polyester. Polyester, it's plastic, and plastic is far more resistant than a natural material. 100% polyester t-shirt is far more resistant than 100% cotton t-shirt. It has other problem, like for example, having a super resistant material means like when it ends, for example, in the nature in Ghana or in Kenya, well, it never disappear. Okay, and also when you wear it, you smell bad. Polyester has a lot of not good aspect, but in terms of quality. In terms of resistance, fast fashion can make really solid clothes that are much more resistant than a wool or cotton garment. So that's why fast fashion will always try to push physical durability as an indicator to judge the quality or the ecology of clothing. This is the first thing I learned. The second thing I learned, and this is specific to France. This is specific to France. So we had some laws in France that prohibited like to burn your unsold item. And at the first, you can say, yeah, this is really important to forbid that because, well, if it's unsold, well, it must be fast fashion that burn unsold item. So there's a report from l'ADEME, which is a French organization specialized in ecology, that found that at the end, like it's less than 1% of clothing that could be burned. There's a real part of the industry that is burning its unsold item. It's not really mass market or fast fashion. It's more luxury, because they have an interest in burning, you know, like they don't want to discount their products. They want to keep the value, so they are never discounting. But the other brand, I mean, if you have unsold item, it's always more economical to sell it to €1 than to burn it. It doesn't mean that burning unsold item does not exist. It means that this is not the most important thing. This is not this is not what is really important. What is really important are the amount of clothes that are really sold, that are really not the unsold. The other thing we've learned I learned is like the fighting for transparency on the where the clothes are made. There's an interesting shift this last year, because some fast fashion brands are really super transparent, even more than luxury brand or some ethical brand. You can go on the Primark website, and there's like our factories, and you have a map with all the factories they work for. I mean, like transparency for transparency doesn't ensure you better working condition. It doesn't ensure you that you don't produce in a country which does not respect the vital salary. So transparency is something like transparent, like asking for more transparency will not penalize fast fashion brands. And the last thing I've learned is regarding pre-order models. We've been in our brand, we've been doing pre-orders during a time, and we realized that it's really stressful for the factories, because you promise to your client that you're going to deliver them in 6 months. So the company cannot have anything that provide them from respecting the deadline. So this is super stressful. And what we realize is that it's so stressful that every time we've done pre-order, we had a downgrade in quality. So it's like, even if it looks like a good idea at the beginning, it's not that much a good idea. And also what we realize for that consumer, like they can go for pre-order for some clothes, but it's like, for example, in France, the hype of pre-order is a little bit past. So it has stayed like a really small part of the business. So this was to say that fighting against unsold item or for pre-order model or for greater transparency, this is great, but it doesn't tackle what defines fast fashion. And if we really want to fight against fast fashion, we need to tackle the two characteristics of fast fashion: low prices and consumption incentive. Regarding sustainable business model, the main issue for ethical brand for being economically viable is that we have to fight what we call the vice bonus. Let me explain that. If you're a textile brand, the worse you produce, like if you're exploiting people in Asia, or if you're using cotton that is grown with a lot of chemicals, the worse you do, the cheaper you can sell. And so this is what we call the vice bonus. The worse you do, the more competitive you are. So if we want to have a sustainable business model that develop and that take over fast fashion, we need regulation to stop this vice bonus. It cannot be cheaper to do bad than to do well. And I'd like to conclude with something interesting, like En Mode Climat is not the only organization asking for fast fashion regulation. There's an organization in Ghana which is called the OR Foundation, and they just launched a campaign which name is Stop Waste Colonialism. And they ask for a global EPR. So this is something that only exists in France for the moment, but will be discussed at the EU level. EPR is like every brand that sell clothes have to pay a small tax, and this tax is supposed to go to the people that deal with the waste of the clothing. And this organization is asking for this EPR to be global, and that also the money of EPR go until the countries that deal with the textile waste. Because for the moment, for example, in France, the money is not going to the African countries where we send our old clothes. So I encourage you to check on this campaign. I will put the link in the. Someone already done that, so you can read what the OR Foundation writes. They are really super clever on textile issues. That's it for me. Sorry for my very bad English.
Thank you, Julia. It was very interesting, and it's always useful to like learn how really like the brands that are on the ground are experiencing demands that can be more theoretical or less, and your views. Some questions that people have been raising in the Q&A box was there's this one about like, what do you think makes then consumers shift their consumption habits? You said, is it really price, or like what would you think?
Yeah, it's price. For the moment, what we see in France is like on 10 clothes that are sold, there are 7 that come from low-cost brands. So for the moment, mainly the first thing that people check is price. So if we want a global change, we need to have a global change in law that make polluting clothes more expensive than the one that are ethical or made more locally.
Thank you. And And then Fatou is asking if we can consider the huge amount of second-hand clothes sent to Africa as the first step of a recycling process.
So there's something we have to talk through about recycling in textile. This is not happening, and this will never happen. Like 99% of the recycled polyester used in textile come from a old bottle, and it's, well, I'll send an article on this channel to explain that how it is not sustainable. But the main thing to understand is we don't manage to make new clothes with old clothes. We can just downcycle. We can make a tote bag with old clothes, or we can marginally make some clothes with some. Marginally, we could manage to do that, but there's some recycling is delusional. This is not going to happen. What we must do is like to make laster clothes, to repair them, and then to downcycle them. But we will never manage to recycle textile, and this is and we can see it today. There's just like 1% of textiles that are really put into this circular stuff. Textile recycling is like an image that is used by fast fashion to make you believe that we can still produce and consume that much and throw away that much because it's going to be recycled. Nothing is recycled, everything is sent away, and at the end is polluting African countries. So the sooner we realize that recycling is a false image in textile, the better we will be to fight fast fashion.
Thank you. There's another question on EPR, but I suggest we'll discuss EPR at the end after the presentation from Teresa. So thank you very much, Julia. We will now have a presentation from Teresa, and then we'll have a conversation where we're going to talk about EPR, extended producer responsibility, that Julia has introduced. And I'm sure Teresa will talk about as well, because that's definitely a controversial issue. So our next and last speaker is Teresa Morsen, who is my colleague at Zero Waste Europe, is a policy officer. And she's following policy developments at the EU level and involved in advocacy within European institutions, in particular developments regarding the EU textile strategy, EPR, and collection of textiles. Teresa, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jean-Marc, and thanks everyone for participating, and thanks for the very interesting input we already heard from Julia and Anna. I'd like to continue a little bit focusing on if we have to find the problem and we know what businesses can do, what sustainable business look like, what can policy do, especially policy at the EU level, but also in general. So how can governments interact to fix the broken textile system? So I'll give you a short overview. This is not a list of a selection of policy interventions. And I'd like to just give a little kind of heads up in the start. So we think that we probably need a mix of different policy interventions that are well designed, go together, and where we also test a couple of these options in perhaps smaller settings. I'll present a couple of options that have been tested. There's compelling arguments to look deeper into it, but obviously we haven't seen them yet on like a huge or like kind of EU or global level. So the first one I'd like to present is the ban on the destruction of unsold goods. And for this one, we actually kind of inching into the right direction, because the EU strategy for sustainable textiles actually foresees that by 2024 there should be that's when it should be adopted. There should in the future be a disclosure of the number of discarded products and what happens with them after they're discarded. And I think the important thing here is that this will generate the data on how much is actually destroyed that's not sold. And the important thing is that such a law is already in place in France, so it's definitely feasible. And we'll see how much how many clothes will be actually destroyed. I think it's it's important is the scope of such a law. So for instance, it should include inventory, dead stock, returned items, unsold goods, and it shouldn't leave any loopholes for any other unsold stock that can still be destroyed. I think this is mentioned by Julia, and perhaps we have a bit of a different background there, but we think that there's not only the problem with luxury brands, they try to protect their exclusive reputation and destroying goods. We've heard stories from Burberry, but also we've seen that fast fashion brands, there is reports of H&M, for instance, and destroying unsold goods. So we think it's important that this not only addresses the luxury brands, but we see that there's a particular incentive for those brands. There's also the problem with e-commerce that poses a particular challenge with free returns, which have to be addressed. So for instance, through kind of limitation of free returns, but that's something that obviously the brands would then have to figure out how to limit how to minimize the returns and the unsold goods that then would need to be treated. The second option, and that's perhaps a more interesting one, is disincentivizing consumption. So I'm gonna admit this is a difficult one for policy to address. The idea is that in fashion, there have been some work on the kind of sufficiency in fashion and consumption corridors. We've seen some great work developed in that field, and the idea is that we should define some kind of sufficiency. So how many clothes do people actually need to dress well, feel comfortable, and to avoid excess? There's actually been some work done, and I'm going to link this in my references, on the number of items that people actually need. Obviously, this is difficult to quantify because of cultural differences and lifestyles and so on. But there has definitely been some interesting work, research happening in the field, and we think that's definitely worth looking into more. The problem is, this has also been mentioned by Julia already, the emotional durability versus the physical durability. So for instance, if we have eco-design rules for clothing that might address the physical durability of clothes, might make them better quality, so the kind of reused clothes are then lasting longer and so on. That doesn't mean that they're actually emotionally durable, so that people actually want to keep them longer. So to address this emotional durability issue, we would propose a couple of policy interventions, and a particular kind of focus should be on e-commerce and social media platforms where people are really exposed to a lot of advertisements, and also to do with the e-commerce, there's the kind of online and offline advertisement, but also the kind of free returns, next day delivery, so everything that makes it really easy to engage in like impulsive shopping. This is something that can be addressed through different legislation, national and European wide. And that we need perhaps more research into how addressing this issue. The other thing is to disincentivize consumption on like a societal level, is to look into how to promote a positive image that goes beyond materialism, and for that, one option could be to already include this in school curricula and or in public awareness campaigns, so people from an early age on already learn that they're kind of reducing consumption, having ideas about sufficiency in the textile or their fashion consumption, but also in other parts of kind of because of our consumers' lives, might be very beneficial. The next policy intervention is extended producer responsibility. Julia already mentioned what extended producer responsibility is. So the idea that all producers have to pay a fee, and it's traditionally a waste management tool. So the fee will pay for the treatment of the waste. And we would like this to go beyond just covering the treatment costs, so collecting the waste and sorting it and recycling. So we think that eco-modulation of fees could be a good driver for more sustainable production. This must be in line with the waste hierarchy as well. At the moment, we see that some EU rules actually limit what member states can do in terms of eco-modulation. That's not ideal, but obviously legislation can be changed. There's another thing that, for instance, earmarking a certain fee for reuse and waste prevention systems could really help to sort for reuse and recycling and set up these systems that are not otherwise economically viable. Such a system or such a fund already exists in France and could obviously be extended to other countries. I think, and this is the crucial point that we think could really help bringing down the volumes of the clothes put on the market, and that's the fee on tax or like a kind of tax on the number of items that is put on the market. So the idea is that brands, for instance, would receive a malus as soon as they hit a certain number of items placed on the market. So from a certain volume of new items placed on the market, the EPR fee would rise significantly. And the same could be for brands that put on a lower number of items on the market, that they could receive a bonus and kind of be rewarded for instance, systems like product as a service and sharing, reusing. That's the overall idea. So this could really incentivize brands from producing lesser clothes on a higher volume, on a higher quality, but lesser volumes that way. The next one. So this is something that perhaps it's not very familiar to many people, but we have before in legislation introduced resource reduction targets. Those of you who are based in Europe might have seen the EU agreeing on gas reduction and targets in the energy crisis, and member states campaigning for the citizens to use less energy, for instance. So a similar thing could happen in the textiles sector, but also in resource use reduction in general. So we think that, for instance, targets on reusing products is not enough. We need to bring down the volume, and therefore kind of developing a method that would establish for clothing, but also for other sectors, limits on pollution. And this should be in line with the carbon budgets. Jean-Marc mentioned before, we have calculated the budget that we have for plastics, for instance. So a similar thing could be calculated for the textile sector. And then introducing such an EU-wide quantitative target on material consumption could be a way forward. And this could be, sorry for the EU bubble jargon there, but this could be introduced by what's called the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or the Waste Framework Directive, perhaps also other pieces of legislation. That's just an idea. The last policy support that we can think of is supporting virtuous businesses, so tax rebates for certain businesses, funding startups, putting obligations on businesses as well to ensure social and environmental benefits. There's also an idea to, for instance, start discussing with the big European fast fashion brands limits on production and volume caps. Also supporting businesses in their transition from high volume, high growth to, for instance, post-growth businesses, but also obviously just facilitating or helping the brands that are already doing well. We've already had the example from Loom, and for instance, giving them easier access to, for instance, physical space in cities, but also public procurement. So this is limited with fashion items, obviously, but there could be some guidance on public procurement as well. And also enhancing support for non-market exchange, such as repair cafes, clothes swapping parties, these kind of things. The conclusion is, as I already mentioned, that we probably need a mix of all of these policy interventions, and also that business really need to play their part, because we think that policy alone is not enough. And that's it from me for now. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. All right. Thanks for the presentation. We have some questions for you. One is from Ola. How can policy mandate that consumers actually consume efficiently? And that's, I think we can link it to the other issue that Eritas is facing as well, that can policy be that intrusive so that these changes in the media advertisement don't sound too authoritarian or like from a free market perspective? How do we reconcile both things?
Yeah, it's obviously a difficult question. How to not restrict people's freedoms too much. But I think on people's choices are restricted on a lot of different levels. You can't go out and buy, and it depends on the country you're in, you can't go out and buy certain weapons. That's restricted. Your choice is restricted. And assuming that's very extreme, you can't buy certain substances, you can't buy certain medicines just in a shop like this. That's obviously to do with health and safety. So similar things could, for instance, be, this would be the reasoning why it would be fine to also restrict people's choices when it comes to unsustainable consumption.
Thank you. Another question from Ruth. Do you believe that if brands were pressured to disclose and share their volumes of production, this would change the narrative on overproduction?
Sorry, I'm having a little coffee. I'm got a bit of a rough road. Yeah, so I think if I got the question correctly, but happy to also get back into this later on. Changing the narrative on overproduction. I'm not sure I get the question right. I'm sorry. And I can't see the Q&A box at the moment.
No, it's saying that if brands were pressured to disclose and share their volumes of production, would this be enough to cause a change in the narrative on overproduction?
I don't think it would, because we already know how much, well, on average, how much brands produce. So I don't think just having the transparency, Julia mentioned a similar thing, which is having the transparency where it's produced doesn't mean that it actually increases it doesn't mean that there's like living wages and there's environmental and social rules being respected. And I think the similar thing is with just knowing that certain fast fashion brands produce a lot of items. We already know more or less what they do. We know who the biggest producers are. So I think that alone wouldn't really put the pressure on them.
Thank you, Teresa. I suggest now we move to the questions for all speakers. I would like to invite the speakers to connect the cameras. And the first question I would like to raise is about the extended producer responsibility. As you have seen in the chat, Alison, Gary, Jörg were raising the issue of extended producer responsibility, maybe posing some issues. It's true that extended producer responsibility has been used for other sectors such as packaging, and it has has not fixed the problem. It has internalized some costs. Maybe I don't know who wants to go first, but the question on how do we protect consumers from higher prices if EPR is instituted, and actually how do we make EPR work when it doesn't seem to have fixed other sectors? Who wants to go first? Julia?
Yes, I think thinking like that, wanting to maintain low price is not a good fight. It's the false fight, because low price mean we lose our industry. Low price mean that we move our industry to Asia. Low price mean there's no reparation. I mean, if I've seen Primark shoes that cost €6, repairing shoes costs €10. Low price destroy this kind of practice, like repairing your clothes, and it destroy also the jobs and the economy that is linked to that. I can take the example of France. In France, between now and the 80s, the consumption of clothing have been multiplied by 2, and more or less the price of clothes has been divided by 2, but the budget of people for clothing is the same. I mean, reducing the price of of clothes doesn't mean that we spend less money. So the idea of wanting to maintain a low price industry is the enemy. The low price industry is generating this overproduction, is generating this rebound effect, is making us use clothes as if they were disposable. So it's not, and it's creating poverty. I mean, what kind of industry gets rich when selling to poor people? This is like, by creating poverty in Europe, the fast fashion is growing. And now in Europe, we have like inflation. So people has less money because fuel is more expensive, because food is more expensive. So the more people we have, the more fast fashion get strong. So this is a fight we should not fight. And even if you think, well, people has less money, so we should do something. Well, imagine in France, we could make like EPR. EPR, you put it like €1 by clothes and you target fast fashion. Every fast fashion brand, every fast fashion clothes must pay €1 to be on the market. That's $2 billion you can use not to decrease the cost of clothes, but to redistribute, for example, for all the other need you really have to fulfill. So low cost and pretending that fast fashion is for poor people is what fast fashion say, and this is false.
Thank you, Julia. Anna or Teresa, you have comments on EPR?
Thank you. I very much agree with some of the things Julia said, and I also think that actually higher prices might actually be good, although I do see the problem, especially for some people who might then not afford to buy even what they need, but it can really create respect for the clothing if it has a higher price, and maybe encourage a person to keep it for longer, or maybe also if we increase the prices, hopefully there could be some left to be shared in the supply chain also for workers or manufacturers. And EPR as such is not my sort of specialty, but I have been looking at electronics much in my life, and there it's really visible that it's not at least incentivizing overconsumption in any way. So what is happening there is just like, yeah, we might the recycling rate of electronics might have gone up, but even so we can't recycle yet everything, and a lot of appliances that could be reused are even put for recycling because there's no incentive to sort of categorize what can be reused and what not. So definitely the important thing if we put EPR is somehow we need to incentivize reuse before recycling, because that's more beneficial environmentally, and sort of incentivize not creating waste in the first place. And I think you had, like Teresa had in her presentation, some good examples on how we could do that.
Thank you. Teresa, anything to add on EPR?
Yeah, going back to the problem, obviously price increases. This is something, I'm not saying EPR is the only the kind of silver bullet. We need a mixture of different policy actions, but I also agree that making clothes more expensive while increasing the quality, it would help addressing the issue. And yes, as the other said, keeping a garment for longer, using repair options and reuse options might actually then make it possible for everyone to access the clothing that they need. Obviously, we're also dipping into, when it comes to social issues, we have huge social inequalities in Europe, and addressing that can't be the task of the textile legislation. We need other policies, that social policies that actually address inequality. This is obviously something that's not the focus of this webinar, but I think we can't expect EPR to fix the issue of people not earning living wages.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you. We can continue the discussion on EPR. I would like to ask a question, however, to Julia. See that Solène is asking this question, like, if you don't do pre-orders, what is your business model to make sure you don't overproduce? Because if we agree we need to reduce overproduction, you're saying that pre-orders are not the solution. How do you address overproduction without pre-orders?
So Okay, I can answer on my brand, and then I would like to make an explanation on what is overproduction and how it does not apply at brand level, but at, I mean, a country level or at a system level. So what we do is we don't make collections, so we have only permanent items. So you always have a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and we reproduce when we have finished to sell them. And if the thing to understand is, why do brands want to get rid of clothes? It's because they need to make space for new collection entering. If you always sell white t-shirts, even if you have overproduced in the sense that you have stock for 2 years, well, if you're able to, if you don't need to get rid of them, I mean, if it's okay for you to sell a white t-shirt during 2 years, there's no problem. The real reason why brands do have to get rid of their old stock is because they are introducing new collection. And why are they introducing new collection? Because this is a way to sell stuff to people. Because if you look at your dressing or any dressing in Europe, even of people with very few money, everybody has too much clothes. Everybody has enough jeans, t-shirts, and sweat and pullover, enough to get dressed. So the only way to make people buy stuff when all their needs are provided is to make low price and incentive to consumption, and new and making something new, introducing new clothes is the way of making you desire something you don't have. I'm sure that you all discover that suddenly you need a white polar like the Patagonia, which is really trendy this last months. You've seen people with that, and you say, I don't have that in my dressing. I should buy one. And overproduction is not at a brand level. I mean, I would be okay to have like a brand producing massively, like billions, no, not billions, but millions of items. But if they are all made in France and in organic cotton, it's not a problem. You see what I mean? And we are overproducing only because we are selling at very low prices. But if the clothes were made in our country, at the same and if the people making our clothes were paid at the same salary that we are paying ourselves, they won't. We would not overproduce, because like we would pay the clothes the fair price for what they are. So it's not working at the brand level. It's working at a system level, and disclosing the volume is not the real disclosing the volume or saying to the brand you cannot produce more than that will not fix the thing. If you say to Shein you cannot produce more than 10 million clothes, you will have a Shein 2 that will go there and produce the parts you don't let them produce. It's the root of the overproduction is the low cost. Is producing in countries where minimum wage is too low. This is what's driving our production. Okay.
Thank you, Julia. Very compelling arguments. Anna or Teresa, your comment on that? Otherwise, Anna, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I very much agree with Julia, but I would just like to raise like a sort of other viewpoint. I think for us to raise the prices, we don't need to only produce in Europe, but we can keep, I think, in my opinion, we can keep producing in the current production countries such as India and Bangladesh, but simply pay more for the manufacturers and make sure that payment goes down to the workers also. Now that's not an easy thing to do, and I understand that bringing production back to Europe seems like a good idea, because we have the laws here that are protecting the workers, and it would be automatically sort of more expensive. But I sort of want like to see I don't think maybe it's fair also that we have produced all this time in these production countries. We have in some cases polluted the environment. The people have gotten such a low wage that they haven't been able to save up on anything, and then we just take all the production away. I think I see that it could be that we have global supply chains in the future also because the logistics is very small part of the environmental impacts actually. So in that sense also it could be okay from an environmental point also to keep producing in the current production countries, but just do it in a better way.
Thank you. Well, that's very useful. And I would like to raise a question that Amanda raised before, and maybe like for you, Anna or Teresa. She's asking about how could we design in the positive social impacts into the EU legislation, because as you said, Anna, this is it's important that we do that, but of course, EU social legislation applies to the EU, right? And here we're talking about like raising the standards around the world. So how would you address that? Any ideas?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, of course, sort of due diligence legislation that they are now drafting also at the European level, which sort of enforces companies, European companies, to assess their human rights risks and to put in place mechanisms to mitigate that risk, for example. So that's, I think, a very good way. But that law should be made ambitious enough to make sure that it actually has a real impact. But of course, if we then think about relocalization and circular economy and how jobs might be lost, I think one of the main issues is, well, first of all, paying living wages now. That's very important. So people there, workers, can sort of build their future, maybe save up some money so they can later re-educate themselves. But maybe companies could also, if they plan to relocate, do some proactive, do this sort of, not just by accident and not just say like, now we're leaving, sorry, bye-bye, but just do it like, plan it, maybe create a fund for workers, maybe, I don't know, give them re-education possibilities so they can learn a new profession after if all the industry has gone or the jobs have decreased. So maybe this could be also something that the EU could force brands to do. So it's more of a planned exit, which at the moment in the current system just doesn't. People can just come and go as they wish, and shift between places and factories, and that's it.
Thank you. Teresa, any comment on that? Or?
Yeah, I was also going to raise the point of the due diligence law, which is really important. And it should be ambitious enough to hold companies liable for any human rights, environmental, or labor rights abuses in the supply chain, which I think is not entirely safe at the moment. Also, I think, yeah, to kind of, if production is being reduced, certain factories are being closed, it's important, as Anna mentioned, that the workers are really involved in this process. I think whether this is outside Europe or in Europe, it's always important to make sure there's some kind of transition pathway, some kind of retraining, all of these things involved. But obviously, we're touching there. We really see how this environmental legislation would be connected to a social agenda, which is also hugely important to also make sure that we keep the social support for these policies. If people see they're just missing out, they might not be supporting these very necessary transitions.
Thank you. We're almost at the end. I would like to ask one quick question, knowing that this is a very complex issue, but it's kind of one of these trap questions to all the speakers. If you would have a superpower, what is one thing that you would change that you think would be really helpful for this transition? You could change one thing. Whoever wants to go first. Julia.
Yeah, I think like make sure all country the minimum wage is a fair living wage. It will change everything. I mean, this ecological catastrophe is happening just because of this low wages. But if there were fair wages everywhere, we would not have low pricing. We would not have overproduction. We would not have this kind of explanation. So this is the main fight we have to fight.
Thank you. Anna or Teresa?
Well, yeah, maybe I can go first. On a similar note, I think, yeah, increase the cost, pay more. That's like everyone should pay more. The consumers should pay more. The brand should pay more for the manufacturers. The manufacturers should pay more to the workers. This would maybe decrease consumption and improve the position of the workers and the wages, etc. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Teresa?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think I can only agree with what people said before. Yeah, I think also making sure that the really big brands pay for the amount of clothes they put on the market. So like a very progressive EPR fee system on volumes might really help hitting the kind of large producers. Yeah, that would be my idea.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We are at time. Just to mention that I would like to thank the speakers for, I think, what was very useful and interesting webinar. There are a number of reports and tools out there that we invite you to check. They're going to be together with the presentations of today and many other resources in our website. Also in the YouTube channel, you can always watch this if you're interested. And just a reminder for you to sign up to the Zero Waste Europe newsletter and Zero Waste Cities newsletter if you want to know more about upcoming webinars. I learned a lot. I hope that you did too. And this is just the beginning. I think it's important that we get this going. And clearly it looks like the price plays a very important role. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.